The letter arrived on a Tuesday, crisp white against the chaos of receipts and overdue bills scattered across the kitchen table of Al Yasmin restaurant. Nadia Ali Yasmin stared at the words, "Final notice, 72 hours, as if staring long enough might dissolve the ink. 28 years old, and this was what her life had become. Cleaning salon chairs that smelled of burnt hair and cardamom, managing her grandmother's failing restaurant, and now watching everything crumble because the bank wouldn't wait another month. Her younger brother Omar stood in the doorway, worry etched across his face. Their sister Amina sat at the corner booth, silent, her college tuition unpaid for the second semester. The dream Nadia had tucked away, Columbia University, architecture, a life beyond inherited debts, felt like a cruel joke now. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. "There's someone here to see you," Omar said quietly. "Says his name is Nabil Farouk." The man who entered wore an expensive suit that didn't belong in their neighborhood. His cologne was subtle, his smile practiced. He carried a briefcase that probably cost more than their monthly rent. "Miss Yasmin," Nabil began, his English flawless, but tinged with a Gulf accent. "I represent a client who has a proposition that could solve your financial difficulties." Nadia's stomach tightened. She knew how these stories went. Nothing in life came without a price, and men in expensive suits always wanted something more than money could buy. "I'm listening," she said, crossing her arms. What Nabil proposed was insane. An arranged marriage to a 75-year-old sheikh from Dubai. A widower, seeking companionship, nothing more. In exchange, all debts cleared, the restaurant saved, her siblings' futures secured. 1 year, he said, just 1 year of her life. The air in the restaurant felt suddenly thin. Nadia spent 3 days drowning in the impossibility of choice. She walked the streets of her Brooklyn neighborhood, past the bodega where she'd bought candy as a child, past the mosque her grandmother had helped build, past the salon where her mother had once worked before cancer took her. Every corner held a memory, every face a reminder of what she'd lose if she let Al Yasmin die. Omar tried to talk her out of it. Amina cried. But the numbers didn't lie. $72,000 in debt. The restaurant's lease ending in 6 months. Columbia was already a ghost, but at least her siblings could have their dreams. "He's old," Nabil assured her during their second meeting, sliding glossy photographs across the table. The images showed a palatial compound, vast gardens, servants in traditional dress. "He seeks only respect and gentle companionship. You'll have your own quarters. After 1 year, if you choose to leave, you'll receive additional compensation." The contract was thick, written in both English and Arabic. Nadia read every word twice, her architecture-trained eye catching the precision in the language. Legal, binding, shockingly generous in its terms, except for the part where she'd be living with a stranger in a foreign country, playing wife to someone old enough to be her grandfather. She signed on a Thursday. The sunset ceremony happened so quickly, Nadia barely processed it. Women in elegant abayas prepared her, their hands gentle as they draped traditional wedding garments over her shoulders. The fabric was exquisite, embroidered with gold thread that caught the fading light. No one spoke much English. Nadia felt like an actor in a film she hadn't auditioned for. The garden where they gathered was stunning. Date palms swaying against a sky painted in shades of amber and rose. 50 guests, maybe more, all strangers. The air smelled of frankincense and jasmine. And then he appeared. The groom moved slowly, leaning heavily on an ornate cane. He wore traditional robes and a ceremonial veil that obscured his face completely. His hands, visible beneath embroidered cuffs, were covered in thin gloves. Even his voice, when he spoke the traditional vows in Arabic, sounded rough, aged, filtered through fabric. Nadia repeated her lines phonetically, coached by a woman who smiled encouragingly. The ceremony was beautiful and surreal and completely terrifying. When it ended, applause rippled through the crowd. She was married to a man whose face she hadn't seen. The reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and rich food she couldn't taste. Finally, as the last guests departed, a servant led her to the private wing. "The Sheikh will join you shortly," the woman said in careful English. Nadia stood in the lavish bedroom, her heart hammering. This was it, the price she'd agreed to pay. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, thinking of Omar, of Amina, of the restaurant that would survive because of this sacrifice. The door opened. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, the cane tapping against marble. She kept her eyes shut, unable to face what came next. Then, "You can look now." The voice was different, younger, stripped of its rasping edge. Nadia's eyes flew open. The man standing before her was removing his gloves, his veil, his glasses, each piece revealing something impossible. Dark hair, sharp jawline, skin unmarked by age, eyes that looked directly into hers with an intensity that made her step back. "I'm Samir al-Rashid," he said quietly. "I'm 32 years old." The room tilted. Nadia gripped the edge of a chair, her mind struggling to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. This wasn't the elderly widower. This was. Who was this? What? Her voice came out strangled. "What the hell is going on?" Samir set the costume pieces aside carefully, as if that somehow made the deception less monstrous. "The contract is real. The marriage is legal. Everything Nabil told you was true, except for my age." "You lied." The words were barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of her fury, her terror, her complete and utter disbelief. "You let me think." "I staged it," he interrupted. "The disguise, the presentation. I wanted to know if someone could choose me without youth, without charm, out of duty alone." Nadia felt like she was going to be sick. She thought of Omar's warnings, Amina's tears, the contract she'd read so carefully without ever suspecting this level of manipulation. "You're insane," she said. "This is insane. I want an annulment, right now. I'm calling." "The ceremony was conducted under Islamic law," Samir said, his voice level, but his eyes betraying something. "Guilt, maybe. It's binding, but I'm not keeping you prisoner. You can leave tomorrow if you choose." "If I leave, my family loses everything." "No." He shook his head firmly. "Your debts are paid regardless. That doesn't change." Nadia stared at him, trying to process the mess of emotions crashing through her. Relief that she could leave, rage at being manipulated, confusion about why he'd do something so elaborate and cruel. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you do this?" Samir moved to the balcony doors, his back to her. The Dubai skyline glittered beyond the glass, a kingdom of steel and ambition. 3 years ago, I was engaged, he said, to a woman I believed loved me. We were weeks from the wedding when I discovered she'd been having an affair with my business partner. When I confronted her, she laughed, said I was boring, that I took myself too seriously, that my money was the only interesting thing about me. He turned back to face her. I wanted to know if I was wrong. If someone could value commitment, responsibility, duty, the things I actually offer, without the packaging of youth and romance. It was a test. "A test?" Nadia's voice rose. "You treated me like a lab experiment. You let me believe I was sacrificing myself for an old man who needed companionship. Do you have any idea how terrifying?" "I know." Samir's composure cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry. That's inadequate. It's not enough, but it's true. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Samir knelt. Actually knelt, his eyes level with hers. I won't force you to stay. I won't manipulate you further. You have time, space, and choice. I'm asking, not demanding, asking for a chance to prove that I can be more than the man who lied to you. Nadia wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. Instead, she found herself studying his face, looking for more deception and finding only exhaustion. I need sleep, she said, alone, in a locked room. And in the morning, we'll talk. Morning came with unexpected kindness. Nadia woke in a guest suite, the door locked from the inside as promised. On a tray outside her door, mint coffee, fresh dates, pastries that smelled like home, and a handwritten note in careful English. I'm sorry. Today, I'd like to show you the real Dubai, if you'll let me. No pressure, no games, just honesty. S. She shouldn't have gone. Every logical part of her brain screamed to pack her bags and book the next flight home. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe the fact that her anger had faded into exhausted numbness, made her knock on the main hall door an hour later. Samir appeared dressed casually, in jeans and a white shirt, looking far less like a sheikh and more like a normal person. The contrast was jarring. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. They drove in silence through streets that transitioned from ultra-modern glass towers to the older parts of the city. Samir parked near the spice souk, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Nadia smelled something familiar. Cumin, saffron, cardamom. The same scents that filled Al-Yasmin's kitchen. He didn't try to impress her with wealth. Instead, he walked her through narrow market corridors, stopping at a small cafe where men played backgammon and argued about football. They drank strong Arabic coffee and ate mamoul cookies, while Samir spoke quietly about growing up between tradition and modernity, duty and desire. "My father built his fortune from nothing," he said. "He taught me that power comes with responsibility, that I should use what I have to help others. But he also arranged every aspect of my life, including that first engagement. I rebelled in the stupidest way possible." Nadia watched him, trying to reconcile the vulnerable man across from her with the one who'd orchestrated such an elaborate deception. "You hurt me," she said finally. "Not physically, but you made me feel like an object, a means to an end." "I know," Samir said, "and I can't undo that. But I can try to show you something real." Over the following weeks, he did exactly that. Samir never pushed, never demanded. He showed her the refugee school he funded, where Syrian and Yemeni children learned in Arabic and English. Every Wednesday, he read to them, not as a photo opportunity, but because he genuinely enjoyed it. He introduced her to the architects redesigning parts of the city, knowing her background. When Nadia mentioned her abandoned dreams of Colombia, he arranged for her to audit classes online through a university partnership program he quietly sponsored. Slowly, painfully, something shifted. Nadia started joining him for morning coffee on the terrace, their conversations stretching from polite small talk to deeper subjects. She learned he wrote poetry, terrible poetry, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile, and that he'd wanted to be a teacher before duty called him to run his father's company. She told him about her mother's battle with cancer, about reading architecture books in the salon during slow afternoons, about the precise moment she realized she'd have to give up Colombia to save her family. "You shouldn't have had to choose," Samir said one evening, his voice rough with emotion. "But I did, and now I'm here, in this bizarre situation with you." He looked at her then, really looked, and Nadia felt something stir that she'd been desperately trying to suppress. Attraction, yes, but also understanding. Recognition of another person carrying weight they hadn't asked for. They were standing on a rooftop terrace, under a sky absolutely thick with stars. Dubai's lights couldn't diminish. Samir had been explaining a new community project when he'd stopped mid-sentence, distracted by her expression. "What?" she asked. "You look like you belong here," he said softly. "Like you were meant to stand under these stars." Nadia's heart hammered. Don't what? Don't make me feel things. Don't make this complicated." Samir closed the distance between them, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I think it's already complicated," he said. "You lied to me," Nadia whispered, but the words had lost their sharp edge. "I did. If I could go back and do it differently, I would. But I can't change what happened. I can only show you who I actually am." He stepped back, giving her space she suddenly didn't want. "You're free to leave whenever you choose. No consequences. Your family's debts are cleared. You'd receive the full compensation. I'll arrange everything. Why are you saying this now? Because you need to know you can choose. Really choose. Not because of money or obligation, but because you want to." The next morning, Nadia called her siblings. Omar was thriving, already talking about culinary school. Amina had returned to college. The restaurant was stable, profitable even, with the manager Samir's team had helped them hire. She had no reason to stay, no obligation. And yet, that afternoon, Nadia found Samir in his office, reviewing contracts. He looked up, surprised as she entered. "I'm staying," she said. "Not because of the agreement, not because I have to, but because I want to understand what this could be if we started over." Honestly this time. Something in Samir's expression cracked. Relief, joy, disbelief all mixed together. "You mean it?" "On one condition. No more tests. No more games. If this doesn't work, it'll be because we're incompatible, not because you were running some experiment." "Deal," he said immediately. "Nadia, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't make promises yet. Just show up, every day. That's all I'm asking." He nodded, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Nadia saw genuine hope in his eyes. The months that followed weren't perfect. They argued about everything from politics to interior design. Nadia maintained her own space, her own projects, refusing to be absorbed into his world without maintaining her identity. But they also laughed. They explored. Samir showed her the desert at sunrise, where silence felt like a form of prayer. Nadia showed him how to make proper kibbeh, teasing him mercilessly when he burned the first batch. He transformed an entire wing of his compound into a design studio, filling it with drafting tables and architecture books. She enrolled in a program at an American university with a Dubai campus, her studies finally back on track. When they traveled to New York for her to visit her family, Samir won them over not with money, but with genuine interest. He washed dishes at Al Yasmin, joked with Omar about football, and sat with Amina, discussing her sociology classes. "He's good for you," Omar said quietly one evening. "I know how this started, but I can see how he looks at you now." Nadia couldn't argue. Somewhere between anger and forgiveness, between obligation and choice, she'd fallen in love with the complicated, flawed, earnest man who'd entered her life through deception, but stayed through dedication. One evening, back in Dubai, Samir asked her to accompany him to his office. The space was empty except for one wall covered in architectural sketches. Her sketches, from throughout their months together. "I've been collecting them," he admitted, "not to invade your privacy, but because they're brilliant. Nadia, I want to offer you a position heading the design team for our new community center project. Not because you're my wife, but because you're talented, and these communities deserve your vision." She stared at the wall, at the evidence of his attention to her work, her dreams. "You've been planning this? I've been hoping for this," he corrected. "There's a difference." Nadia turned to him, this man who'd begun as her worst nightmare, and somehow became her most unexpected ally. "I need to tell you something." Samir tensed, clearly expecting bad news. "I forgive you," she said simply. "For the lie, for the test, I forgive you." The relief that washed over his face was almost painful to witness. But Nadia wasn't finished. "I forgive you, but I also need you to understand something. I'm staying because I choose to, because I love you, not the sheikh, not the money, not the security. I love the man who reads to children on Wednesdays and burns kibbeh and writes terrible poetry." Samir laughed, the sound thick with emotion. "It is terrible poetry. The worst," she agreed, "but it's yours." He pulled a small box from his desk drawer. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, nothing like the ornate pieces he'd given her during the formal ceremony. "This isn't from a sheikh to his contracted wife," he said, kneeling. "This is from me to you. Nadia Ali Yasmin, will you actually marry me? No contracts, no conditions, just two people who want to build something real together." She pulled him to his feet. "Ask me properly, in Arabic this time." He did, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving hers. And when she said yes, it felt like the first truly honest moment since she'd signed that contract months ago. They held a second ceremony 6 weeks later in the backyard of Al Yasmin. String lights hung between trees. Tables overflowed with food from both their cultures, and music mixed traditional dabke with Brazilian samba rhythms that made no cultural sense but felt perfect anyway. Omar gave a toast that made everyone cry. Amina read a poem about love as a choice, not an obligation. Samir's mother, initially skeptical, embraced Nadia and whispered, "Thank you for seeing my son clearly." The vows they spoke were simple. No elaborate Arabic or formal English, just promises. To be honest, to respect each other's dreams, to argue fairly and forgive genuinely, to build a partnership where power never meant control and love never meant possession. What could have been a scandal became a story of redemption. The restaurant thrived. Nadia's community design classes empowered women across Dubai's working-class neighborhoods. Samir's philanthropic work gained an ethics committee to prevent anyone else from enduring tests that wounded. And between New York and Dubai, between blueprints and poetry, between mint coffee and burned kibbeh, they built something unexpected. A marriage where truth mattered more than tradition, where love was proven through action, not words. Because in the end, Samir's test taught them both the same lesson. You cannot build trust on deception, and love without truth is just another contract waiting to expire.